Hello, and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on air producer, and we're very excited. We are featuring GlobalMindED, and I have with me today Rocio Perez. She is the Director of Leadership for GlobalMindED, and you've got some awesome guests today.
We do. We're here with Chantal and John, who are absolutely amazing. We're going to be talking about Global Minded in our upcoming conference from June 9th through the 11th. But first of all, I want to share a little bit about what Global Minded is. And Global Minded is closing the equity gap through education, employment, and entrepreneurship. Creating opportunities like for people like myself. I grew up in probably one of the poorest places here in this country, which was Laredo, Texas. Lack of opportunities. My father was a migrant worker, immigrants into this country. Fast forward, I had this dream. I was 5 years old, and I'll share this with you a little bit more in detail. I had a dream of becoming a teacher. I just didn't know how it was going to happen because nobody in my life was a teacher. It was a very far-fetched dream. Fast forward throughout life, by the time I was 12, ran away from home.
Oh, wow.
At the age of 14, I ran away from home again. I was pregnant at the age of 14, and instead of having a quinceañera, I had a baby. With a sixth grade education, I had decided to go back to that dream. I had never really lost track of it, and I said, I want to become that teacher. I knocked on the college's doors, and after getting no for an answer, I said, there is no way that I am going to take that as an answer. Like, this is my dream, Alex, right? Who can tell me no to my dream? And I stayed there, and I was very insistent. I said, Rosemary, what other options do I have? And the only other option was to get emancipated so I can go to school, and which is what I did. 30 days later, I was emancipated. I was granted full adultship, if you can only imagine that.
Yeah.
The road had just begun at that point. It was a very interesting, difficult road. I didn't have anyone to guide me. I wish I would have had somebody who could have led me by the hand and said, you know what, Rocio, these are the things that you must know. You must get a mentor. It's important for you to have these certain study skills, these experiences, internships, everything of the like. One of the things that I did do, I took a few semesters, took a break, and
We
then
all
came.
need a break.
We all need a break, right? Sometimes.
Yeah.
I took a break, and then when I came back, I went ahead and decided to mentor students. I led 160 to 200 students per semester, and as I was paving the way, the road was still wet. And I was leading the way and taking them into their own excellence, figuring out what do they need. I had no clue. Along the way, that was the path. That was the path. Fast forward, years later today, I'd like to say that life worked out. I like to say that. I survived. My son survived me. Today he's 27 years old. He's married. He has a beautiful baby. 3-year-old Emilio. Couldn't be any more proud of him.
Yeah.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had 4 businesses as well as several business degrees and continue to inspire and connect people so that they too can tap into their fullest potential. And that's what Global Minded is all about. It is about people like John and Chantal who make the difference in this world, who are leading the way because they know the way. And with that, I'd love to get you connected here.
Well, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Again, my name is Chantal, and I work for the state of Colorado in a wonderful department called the Department of Local Affairs. And I'm involved in Global Minded because of the work we do really in the rural communities. And that's the part that I wanted to talk about with John here today. Because John and I are co-chairing with another gentleman from the Rural Futures Institute, Charles Schroeder from Nebraska. And we had been looking at diversity really in the rural areas as a category of itself, whether it's diversity of thought, process, place, people. It all makes sense when you think that somebody who lives or a community that's existing in a more remote area is sometimes is really difficult in its own way to gain access to services, to mentors, to tutors. And so we started talking about, in terms of Global Minded, what did that mean for the conference, and could this be part of the discussion? And we've decided to host an all-day, more deeper dive on June 9th on the weekend with the Colorado Business Roundtable folks. And we've invited educators, public and private sector, workforce experts, funders, policymakers, to come together to really just talk about the rural aspect of this conversation. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback. We have several people coming from all over the country to talk about this and really come to the playbook of how we can think about rural areas in terms of diversity and access and equity and education and those entrepreneurial pipelines. So we're not quite sure exactly what's going to come out of it, but that's also the value that GlobalMindED brings, because it's a very creative, organic process of bringing people from all over the world, from very disparate backgrounds and fields of expertise, to come up with those kind of off the wall, maybe different thoughts, different creative ways to bring people together. Let me just mention that one of the things that we've learned about rural is it's really about the connectivity. And so often there's nonprofits, there's schools, there's workforce centers, there's libraries, and quite often they're not necessarily connected very well. They each run their own programs, they serve a constituency, but what we're talking about on our June 9th day, and as well throughout the conference through the 11th, is how you connect the individuals, the families, the communities, and then the systems. And so we have invited people from a lot of rural areas around the country who run libraries, who run the hospitals, who run the school district, to talk about what we call anchor institutions and how they can leverage and support each other, because they may not have the resources that an urban central area have to make a real difference for all of these people out there.
That's fascinating, yeah.
That is very fascinating. If somebody were to be listening right now and is maybe hasn't been exposed to GlobalMindED, what would you say? What would you say to them right now?
Well, first of all, I would say come to the conference. I've been 2 times now, and I walked away with so much information and so many contacts that I have stayed in touch with. What I enjoyed most, that I think is different than other conferences, is, like I said, this is a creative and organic process. So there's the freedom to think through things differently. And you never know when things are going to get fired up, because you're meeting somebody from an industry that you don't know anything about, and they say, oh, we can actually participate in this conversation. And so when we invite people in, we hope what they do is they come out of it with more than maybe what we're preparing, inviting them in, so they can really take it and run with it.
And speaking of preparing people and everybody having that opportunity to make sure that they have those great takeaways, what would you say to somebody, okay, I make it to the conference, I'm sold, I'm there. How can I best get what I need out of this conference? How can I leverage my time well spent?
Well, I think one of the most important things is, and this is very important for rural communities, but the website for the GlobalMindED.org, www.globalminded.org, is a great resource. It has all of the list of the agenda, the speakers, and as we are able to upload more information onto the website, you'll be able to really target your area of interest. There are going to be people and tracks who are there looking at the tech industry, looking at the healthcare industry, looking at entrepreneurship. And what's really cool about this, and I keep coming back to connectivity, is that all of these people will be in the same rooms at the same time, all letting their brains fire up.
Wonderful. John, what else is important?
Well, when I look at it, and for me, I'm representing some of our private sector industry partners, and I look at what we need out there, and it's a workforce challenge, right? And so for Siemens, our need is in that middle skilled type labor market, and we very much struggle to fill those positions. And we look to these rural communities that have always been traditionally very self-sufficient communities, right? And we ask them, what are you doing to drive your workforce pipelines? And the answer is usually pretty segmented and with some pretty large gaps. I've talked to a lot of school districts, and I say, how often do you ask, where's my next teacher going to come from? And they're usually trying to recruit that individual from out of state, whatever it is. And what I don't think they realize is they could look internally and say that the students that are in our classrooms today are going to be our next teachers, right? Let's look locally. Let's start making students think, here's the path forward for them to stay in our community. I think the reality is that more frequently, students are going to stay in the communities if they've grown up there, right? As opposed to somebody from Denver maybe moving out to the rural community. So let's start looking at those students and saying, you guys are the pipeline, right? And so that's what I see is really cool about our conference workshop at GlobalMindED, is it's going to take people and say, we're all going to get together because we're all key stakeholders and start thinking about this. And then we're going to say the education model can evolve so that those industry partners like myself can say, here's the needs we have. What gaps are there? How do we address it? And to me, I've come to this word and I'm calling it cooperative education models. And this is where I see we're kind of moving with this, right? We're taking very key stakeholders from these anchor institutions in the community and saying, let's find experiential opportunities for students so they understand what are these opportunities in their community. I think that that is such a glaring gap, and that's the goal here, is to look at how a cooperative model like this can expose students and show them that there's a path forward to a career that's sustainable in their community.
I think that's very fascinating, considering that more than 50% of employers do not have the talent that they're seeking.
Yes.
They cannot grow their companies.
Yes.
And when we're looking at diversity in general, we're looking at when we want diverse talent to be able to help us grow that thought process. Everyone brings something different to the table, and it's through that creativity that innovation really comes to life. And when we know that 89% of first generation students won't make it all the way through college, what is the greatest impact? I know that growing from within is so important to focus. What would you tell employers right now as it relates to what's important to you and how that's going to impact their future workforce?
The biggest thing I would tell employers is that you need to come to the table and start offering work-based learning opportunities. To me, that is the antithesis of where the education model needs to evolve to, right? We've been so focused on this theoretical side of education and far less on the applied elements of it. And that takes the industry and business community members coming to the table to offer up those opportunities. And so anybody who's listening in industry, I would say that that is going to be the most important piece, is to start exploring how you can bring students into your business. That'll both help them understand what their options are, but it'll also give you insight into what your talent pipeline is like right there locally. So truly, that's where I want to see the education model evolve to.
I know it's fascinating. A lot of people may ask, why first gen, or why students who may have not had these opportunities? How easy is it to work with them? Do they need extra support? What does that look like? What's the impact on my bottom line at the end of the day if I do involve them? What would you say to them?
Well, I think first gen just opens up such a world of creativity, right? And because they've seen other areas and they say, I want to do so much. And I go back to your story, Rocio, right? There was such a passion that came from it. And that is what drives innovation, right? And entrepreneurship. And so especially in rural communities, I think that becomes even more powerful, right? Because entrepreneurship in rural communities, I think, can really be a sustaining piece that can add so much. And too often I hear people say, well, we have such limited industries. It might be mineral resource or agriculture, right? And that's what they look to. But the reality is there's so much innovation within those fields that I think next-gen students can really drive forward.
I think it's fascinating. I recently shared a story. People were asking, okay, Rocio, where did this entrepreneur spirit come from? And I would say, I remember being 5 years old. When 5 was such a pivotal year in my life. So many things happened, Alex. I don't know if you remember when you were 5. I know when I was 5, I was like this little rock star girl and very excited about life. And I saw opportunities everywhere. I lived in a sea of poverty, yet there was so much opportunity with what I saw. And people asked, well, where did it come from? Well, here I go. It wasn't the lemonade stand because there was no lemons. There was no money for lemons. What there was an abundance of copper in the yard. And that's what I did. I took copper down the street to the local junkyard. And that's where we talk about innovation, right? That's when we talk about entrepreneurship and seeing outside the box, taking those resources and figuring out, how do I create with what I have, with the tools and resources and what's accessible to me, versus saying it must look this way. And if we continue to do things the way we're doing them, we're always going to have the results that we've always had.
Yes.
Innovation, really, forget the box. There is no box.
Well, and that's why when I look at rural communities being self-sustained, right, they have to evolve and find those ways to innovate within kind of the parameters that they have to work with, right? And I think that's what we're looking to accomplish with our pre-conference workshop, is to start looking at those ideas, build a framework for how to implement and deploy some of those types of models.
Well, and I think one of the things that's interesting about what you're both talking about when you were saying the box, because I always think about it's not about best practices. It's not necessarily about looking to see what somebody else did, because that in itself already puts a box in place. It's
There's
really
some limitations there.
It's already about the next practices, and that to me is what GlobalMindED is about.
Right. What we're about to create hasn't been created.
Right.
And that's really one of the things that I really love, Alex, is about the innovation of it all, how it's all coming together, and we've never seen what we're creating. And that's the beauty of it. Being comfortable in that space of co-creation, which I love working with individuals and figuring out how do we take these resources, this thought process, and co-create what can really come out of me, right? Because the education comes from within. What is it that sparks inside of me?
And I find that in rural communities, it is a lot about bringing the diverse stakeholders together. As I said earlier, sometimes we work within our specific field of expertise. But then when you, for instance, some of the innovative things that are happening around Colorado, there's a community named Rifle up on the western slope, and they're building affordable housing for teachers on top of their town hall. So
That's amazing.
Yes, so and you have school districts that are looking at dealing with
Salida
the housing
School District
issues.
is doing that, where they're actually having students build homes,
That's
and
right.
then the teachers get to live in them, so students
That's
get that very
fascinating.
applied experience. And for teachers, with the rising cost of home ownership, and especially in a growing community like Salida, it's a win-win.
That's right.
Talk about ownership and co-creation and
That's
having
right.
pride in everything that we're doing together.
And often that's a really difficult thing to do in rural communities, because everybody is working hard, sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs. A gentleman I work with who's the executive director of the Department of Local Affairs is first gen, and he came to the conference last year, and he grew up in a rural farm in New Jersey. And he talked a lot about this at the conference, and he came out feeling like he had really learned a lot about the different unique nature of how to do that. And Rocio, I was curious if you've had mentors along the way that helped keep you going.
Most definitely. I think we're interviewing the interviewer, right? I love that. And I know that's a question that's always interesting. As a matter of fact, I found people to mentor me, and I think it was the reverse. To a certain degree, I would say, this is what I want to do. And they would just listen to me, right? They didn't really know 100% how to mentor me or what to do. I wish there would have been somebody that would have taken me along the way and said, you know what, this is what it looks like. Your roadmap of life, this is what it looks like. I'm sure I would have taken advantage of many different opportunities, and probably life wouldn't have been as difficult as it was. I took a bus, Chantal, literally 4 hours in the morning just to make it to school, and 4 hours in the evening to go pick up my son and go back home every single day. When you're 17 years old, you're walking through the snow, you know how heavy your backpacks are. You're carrying your backpack, you're carrying a 2-year-old in your arms and a diaper bag, and life was difficult. Could have it been different? Could have I have received a scholarship? What would have that looked like to be able to afford daycare in the community that I lived in? It would have saved me time, energy, money, resources, heartaches. It was difficult, when you're taking that very next step. What would life look like if we were to take somebody by the hand right now and say, okay, I've been along this path. Allow me, what are your hopes, your dreams? What would you like to accomplish? And then helping them start filling in those gaps of what they need. Maybe they need an internship. Maybe they need a scholarship. Maybe they need just to even develop those soft skills where they're going to be able to communicate even better with other individuals. Life would have been very different.
Well, the main, besides this wonderful mission of GlobalMindED as an organization, we have a bold goal, and the bold goal is to connect algorithmically 25 million first-gen students with mentors and tutors. So I think of it as maybe a Facebook for first-gen, but a way for these students who are working so hard to get ahead, but maybe they don't have that person there. And now for rural communities where maybe it is 4 or 5 or 6 hours away, they can have a way to do it online with people who've been through it, who've lived through it, who can just reach that hand out and help them move forward.
What are some of the things that you think in your experience, Chantal and John, that's important for somebody to know when they're working with First Gen? What's important for them to know in your experience?
Be flexible.
Be flexible. Doesn't always look the same way, right?
I mean, it's kind of to your point, you can have a mentor and they can try and give you some of those guidelines, but it's probably always going to have some context that's specific to you, right? And that's just kind of the world we live in. But be flexible and be resilient, right? Because it's going to take that. We see surprising statistics regularly about students who don't make it through college, whether they're first gen or second gen, right? And so the reality is that there's challenges there all the way through. And so again, with GlobalMindED, having access to this network of people will give some of that framework. And then if the students can bring some of that resiliency and flexibility, that ultimately leads to the positive outcome of getting that college degree. And then ultimately, I'd love to see those people returning to their rural communities, right? And I think that that's when it becomes so powerful. They now have access to so much more information, knowledge, ideas, network that they can build off from there. And that also kind of comes back into the connectivity piece, right? There's so many more opportunities afforded to rural communities when they have access to the information and connectivity they need, right? We don't always need to think of these communities as being limited, right? Work is becoming remote. There are so many more opportunities for, jobs in IT can be remote, right? So this just opens up this whole realm. So students who are first gen from rural communities don't have to think they have to stay in urban areas, right? If they want to go back to their community, they now have that opportunity.
Well, we have a lot to talk about connectivity and through John's expertise at Siemens, but let me just go back and let's come back to that. But let me just go back to your question, because a different way to look at it as well with being flexible is to meet people where they are. And you never know what services, what mentorship somebody might need. One of the things that got me passionate about this conversation was reading Hillbilly Elegy last year, which is a great read. And it's a gentleman who was a lawyer, came from rural Appalachia. And when he went to Yale Law School, he did not have the skills and the tools to be able to move forward. And one of the poignant moments in the book is when he was invited to the recruiting dinner with law firms. And he was on the phone out in the hall calling his girlfriend to find out what fork he should be using. And that is something that at that kind of dinner, in that kind of setting, the people who were not first gen knew that instinctively. They had been taught that since they were kids. They knew how to enter a conversation to be recruited to a top law firm. And that's something that is really basic to some people who might know that already. But it is not basic to the person who is not taught that.
If you do want some advice, work your way out in.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to silverware,
Yes.
that's
Right.
That's
right,
what
the
I
standing
learned.
rule.
Okay. There you go. I know the first time that I went, I was a bit of a shock. I said, "Wow, what does this look like?" We had a fork, a spoon, and maybe a knife, right? And that was the extent of it.
And now
And
you
all
have
of a
to
sudden-
count the times.
And it's so funny because everywhere I go, it doesn't fail. It doesn't matter whether I'm at a banquet or a dinner or whatever that looks like. There's always 2 or 3 people at the table asking, "Is that yours or mine?"
Yeah.
It never fails.
It never fails. I'm like,
left or right.
left or right, but go. That's
Yeah.
great advice. Go from the outside in.
Yeah, that's what I had to learn. I went to my first banquet. I went to a sports banquet when I was in 7th grade, and they had it on the table set up for us like that, and they told us how to do it. That was what the banquet was for, was to learn how to do that. Actually, it was very nice.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think the biggest takeaway is to take it slow and understand that trust, develop trust, to have patience, to become that mentor, and to know that things are going to look differently. Everything is absolutely differently in different community settings, and just be patient, loving, and just know that you are making a difference and people will succeed as a
And they're
result
not
of it.
alone.
And they're
I
not
think
alone.
that's one of the missions of GlobalMindED and this interconnectivity is the first gen students that are out there, when they get connected, they're connected. Just like the name of this program, Connected and Collaborate.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, we will be right back. Hang on with us. And in the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page. We'll be right back here on Connect and Collaborate.
Wonderful.
Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we are talking global-minded. And it's one of my passions, I have to say, is education, right? Making sure that we get proper education to everyone. Everyone's entitled to an education. And I think that you guys have a great mission going on here. Again, I have Rocio Perez here next to me. She's the Director of Leadership with GlobalMindED. We have some great guests with us. Do you want to jump right back in?
Most definitely. I'm really excited to hear even more about that cooperative education model, John. I know that you were sharing off the air and the impact. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we look at our education model, right, we've always let it fall on the school district exclusively. And that's created this gap, is the reality, right? Because there's more stakeholders than just the school district. And so that's the idea of a cooperative education model, is you take those key stakeholders in the community and you bring them together and you say, you have to be a part of the education model, right? For so long, business was kept at arm's length, right? You don't have a seat at the table with education, right? We'll prepare them, we'll send them to you, and then you get them, right? But that's not getting us where we need to be. And so again, that's this idea of, okay, we have to bring these stakeholders together and we have to fit them into the education model in order to create some of these better outcomes. And so I mentioned the Salida School District. I think they're a really great example that I've seen right here in the state of Colorado. They've got students who are looking for applied experiential learning. They found some partners in the construction industry who said, yes, we're willing to provide some of this mentoring, some support, some ideas, some oversight, maybe even some financial or material contributions, right? So that students can actually come and build homes. And sure, students might have had shop class or some of those other types of experiences, but they never had insight, right, into where does that take them, right? All they know is they could build some little trinket out of wood. They weren't thinking about it in terms of designing a home, right, and what goes into that. So suddenly you've now made this experience that was once just about theoretical education, and you've created this applied understanding of where it relates in the real world. And that's where I see the model going. And so I love what they've done there. Now, then again, you take another stakeholder, which is the school districts, and attracting and retaining teachers. We hear this all the time across the state of Colorado, that finding teachers is very difficult, especially with the rising cost of housing. So here you are, they've now found a solution to provide that to the teachers and help to attract high quality staff to their district, and they do it through their students, right? Which probably never would have been considered in a million years, right? People probably would have said students aren't capable of something like that, right? How do we ensure them? Some of those issues, but they found a way. And so that's what I want to see us do more of, and that's what I want to bring us together at our workshop and say, okay, here's stakeholders in a community. How do they fit into the education model, and what outcome are they looking for? If a healthcare institution is one of those key anchor institutions in a community, how are they developing their workforce there? They have issues attracting people to those rural communities as well, right? We know that healthcare in the Front Range is growing, and even they have issues. So imagine how the rural community feels. But imagine if the rural community, that rural hospital, was in the school district with students starting at maybe 4th or 5th grade and saying, here's what it's all about. Just exposure. Come tour the facility. Come understand what it is, right? That way when they get to high school and they're talking about biology, suddenly they understand where biology could take them. Right? And so I think that's what I love to see, is it's providing this horizon for students that I don't think the theoretical gets them, right? And so now they understand that here's a path, right? I've learned this theory, here's the application, and here's the local way I can do it right here in my community. So that's the outcome that I think we're all looking for, to understand how do we do that. And it is context specific, right? Because every community is the same, or excuse me, every community is different. And so they're going to have to find who are those anchor institutions, who are the key stakeholders that can come and contribute to this cooperative education model. And if we do it right, it's going to benefit everybody in the community. It's going to lead to more vibrant, more resilient rural communities.
Now let's talk about, and such a perfect segue into, speaking of rural communities, we're talking about students and those opportunities. Where are they doing their homework?
That's a great question. So in Colorado and as many communities across the country, the urban centers obviously have the resources, and there's a lot of services from telecommunications companies. And in rural communities, that's a little bit more difficult. It's expensive to build. And now in Colorado specifically, because we have the Great Rocky Mountains, often that build out is astronomical and it almost is impossible in communities. So we literally have students parked out on the highway by the McDonald's to click into the Wi-Fi to do their homework after school. We have library systems that have volunteers that stay during the night in order to allow kids to come and do their homework. And that's pretty hard. So the state of Colorado and my organization really about 5 years ago started working on rural broadband. And there are different programs specifically for schools and education systems called E-rate. There are also healthcare systems and connectivity for rural healthcare. But we have been investing slowly, and the legislature is doing a great job at looking at statutes and bills and laws and funding to be able to promote these for rural communities. Everybody agrees that this whole field of expertise is important, and just like John is saying about the connectivity, if the rural students out there cannot do their homework online, cannot do their testing, cannot do their research, they are already coming into high school or college, if they can go, 10 steps behind.
Which is very impactful, right? We have those same issues in rural, we have them in the city, we have them in so many different places. What would you say would be a great solution at this point?
That's a tremendously challenging question.
I know
and
it's a challenging question.
Chantal is working very hard on it, right, from what they're doing at the state level. And you're seeing even some individual communities taking ownership of some of those systems because they recognize how critical it is. And they say, okay, maybe we have to own this infrastructure.
And it goes back to the stakeholders working together. So the last few years, the local governments, the state government, all of the industry representatives have been working really closely. And we now have, at this point, regional plans throughout the entire state, which identified exactly where were the gaps, what communities didn't have any broadband, what communities had some, what levels they were. There's federal dollars, there's state dollars, there's local dollars, private dollars. They're all working together to now start building out these areas. And we're reaching our goal slowly, and it's going to get there. And really, for all of us, the eye is on the student and the educational opportunities for connectivity.
And there's no doubt that that connectivity opens up so much more for students, right? We say that in the metro area, they might have access to more industry, right? But in the rural communities, they don't. But now through the process of virtual job shadowing, a student who's located, 5 hours away on the western slope can understand what the job opportunities might be somewhere else through this virtual platform. So there's no doubt that connectivity is really very critical to really having successful cooperative education models and helping students understand what is out there for them.
Another example of that is a great company we have here in the state, Lockheed, an aerospace company, rockets. They created a rural internship program because they know that there are students out there who have the skills they need. And it's just like you were talking about, John, about how employers can find those great employees. So they created this rural internship program where they recruit kids from the rural areas in Colorado, and they bring them into their headquarters, and they spend approximately a week with each different industry within their organization, their company. And they fund that for the kids to come in. So, they couldn't go out there, so they're bringing them in, and hopefully they will go back and stay in their communities and develop those aerospace and tech jobs.
And there's a reality that there is tech in these fields out in rural communities, right? Agriculture isn't just one area that you work in. It can be technology, right? And you can have innovation within it. Same with anything with mineral extraction, right? You've got automated processes. And so the reality is that having exposure to a program like that helps students see that there's more that they can do within their community.
One of the things I'm looking forward to about our Rural Day on June 9th is that you and I are both from Colorado. You mentioned
yes, we are.
We both grew up here. And so we have a Colorado lens. And one of the things the conference is going to do for us is we're also going to be able to hear from people not only nationally but internationally. And so Chuck Schroeder with the Rural Futures Institute in Nebraska also serves on their Public Utilities Commission and leads a lot of the conversations about rural broadband. So he'll be here from another state. We have folks from California. We have folks from education systems. And we're hoping that we get some international voices too, because they are also dealing with a lot of these same things. when we have really vibrant urban centers, a lot of the kids pick up and move away from home. For instance, in France, they were looking at this with a lot of decline of the rural areas and the villages, and the local governments came together with some of the businesses, and they are settling the student loan for kids if they come back and live in the rural areas, because they're trying to revitalize their communities. So that's another innovative way of doing it. And I also am excited to learn about what other countries are doing in this space.
Right, if you can only imagine, Alex, the impact on a community when their talent is leaving.
Right.
How does that help? It really, we're going backwards if we're not making that progress and making that investment and thinking outside of that box with what we've traditionally seen. And how do we co-create something new?
And sometimes this is a little bit under the radar. So, for instance, in Colorado, our economy is booming. And we are one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing economies across the country. And so we get a lot of attention on the fact that we are so strong and businesses are coming here. Our rural communities are actually in a decline. And in Colorado, when that happens, when, let's just say, a coal mine closes down, you have the miners and the families who leave, and then they take their kids out of the schools, and then they do the federal count, and now you don't have the money to hire the teachers, and so then you're losing teachers. And then you have the spouse who was an accountant, the business leaves, and then these rural communities start going into this spiral. That it's a downward cycle, and it's very, very hard to figure out how to capture that and turn it so it then starts spiraling up again in a more successful model.
Right.
But so I think that we're going to learn a lot about this and hear from great people who've been working on this around the country.
That's wonderful. I, for one, am looking forward to this conference. Real quick, how can I get to the conference?
Well, there's many ways you can get to the conference. So one of the ways you can most definitely sign up at globalminded.org. There is opportunities also that I also love to share. There may be some community members who would love to attend and maybe that don't have the financial resources. We do have some scholarships available for individuals who would like to apply for that as well. We do want to make sure that we're as inclusive as possible. We want to make sure that as many people who would love to take advantage of these opportunities can make it to the conference. So they can sign up at globalminded.org.
Yes.
And I'd also like to point out that we're having students attend, and we're having a career fair for them. And to me, this is really important that we include students. It's not just a whole bunch of adults up here having these conversations. So the more students that attend, I think that is really going to enhance the overall outcomes and experience for everybody. So I'd love to see as many students as possible come. And it's on a Saturday, so I know that might be a little tough, but they're not in school, so maybe we can get them.
Maybe we can get them. You know, we have a number of pre-conference workshops. The Rural Day is one of many. For instance, design equity, solving wicked social problems with inclusive design solutions. We have bridging the gap between ability and opportunity, ability, status, youth. It's really going to be interesting. Promising practices for first-gen college programs. And again, we have people coming from all over the world, experts. Dr. Rufus Glasper, the president and CEO of League for Innovation in the Community College System. We have the founder and CEO, Dr. Jessica Rothenberg-Alamy, who is the founder of Cell Ed. And the list goes on and on. And so if anything, what somebody's going to get out of it is just this eye-opening experience of hearing people that have been creative. Digital Citizen Institute. So hear about them and think through what they can bring to their own lives and their work after this kind of experience.
I could only imagine. I think, Alex, if you and I were to go around the entire country, it would take us years to go develop these relationships. For anybody that's listening, I know that I've developed my network over the past 23 plus years, and I have yet to still meet some of these individuals that are coming to the conference. I could only imagine the doors that it would open, those opportunities, leveraging, connecting with these individuals and their thought process, learning from them, collaborating, leveraging resources. How amazing would that be? Because they bring a social network, and that's a network of opportunities. That's something that you cannot even pay for, in essence.
That's right.
We talked a little bit in the last segment about advice that we want to give to our first gen students. And one of the things that I would like to put out there, don't be scared to ask questions. Don't be scared to walk up to these people at this conference and ask them for a card, ask them for an email address.
It might be their next job.
Exactly. Yeah. That was one of the things. And I'm not first gen, but my mom was. Yeah, she was definitely first gen, and so she instilled a lot of that in me. She paid out of pocket. She worked all through school to pay her own way through school, and so I had that same mentality as well. And being bold and asking people questions and making sure you get that connection. Make sure you look in people in the eye and get that email address.
You know, those are soft skills, right, that we hear about all the time that almost can't be taught necessarily in school. And so to have students come and just to interact, right, in a different dynamic with folks in the professional and industrial world, I think is really beneficial. And just that experience will take them and give them that confidence, right, to be bold and to ask another question, to talk to somebody else that they might not have otherwise. And that expands their horizons. And
we will be hosting a pre-conference for First Gen. And I hosted that last year as well as this year. We'll be partaken in that, preparing students. How do they connect? How do they prepare right before the conference so that they can take advantage of the entire conference experience of asking people questions? And for those who may have not been able to make it and still will attend the conference, to ask those questions, to look people in the eye, to be okay with feeling uncomfortable. I know that sometimes, like in my experience, I felt so different. I didn't know what I didn't know, and at times I felt plain awkward, right? I don't know if anyone has ever felt that before. I know I did. And in saying that, there's so many different opportunities that we can take advantage of as individuals, as even us knowing how do we take individuals by the hand and give them that experience of, hey, we're here for you. We may not know what you're going through, but I'm here to help expand that, because it is a scary road, and it's a very, very, very lonely road. I think I felt like I was walking from here to Rome barefoot and back. I definitely felt like that some days.
Yeah.
Well, and we also know, just to tie it back to the private sector, that the diversity of thought and the diversity of your workforce very holistically affects your bottom line positively, whether it's a gender lens or a racial lens. The more people you have who are bringing creative ideas to the table, the better your company is going to be.
Right. And when you talk about cultivating that global workforce, right, on that scale, that's going to be the most beneficial, right? Because you bring such varying perspectives when you take that larger approach. So the more folks that we can have coming together ultimately is where you're going to have the best outcome.
Now, what about the dinner? We are also hosting a dinner that ties, you mentioned globally, that ties with experts from the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Oh, wow.
And so that is something that obviously is happening globally. And a lot of organizations like the World Bank and the UN are really driving this. And you see this trickling to every conversation I'm in. And the mission of GlobalMindED really ties to that bigger network. Rocio, do you want to talk
Most
about
definitely. We will be having the dinner for those individuals that are interested. It will be at the Governor's Mansion, which is a very nice place to come out, work together, and connect with other like-minded individuals. And we can post more information online for those people that are interested. You can always look us up at globalminded.org for additional information.
And that'll just be such a great group of thought leaders, right? Because that's a really high-level group of folks, and so I'm really excited about that dinner personally.
Yeah, but you know, there's obviously on our website, and this is something we can't stop without mentioning, is there's a donation button on our website. So that's really key. Just like every organization, this is a movement. And the more people we have involved, the more people that can donate, the stronger this is going to be as we move forward.
Most definitely, because that will be helping companies at the end of the day. We're helping solve the problems that they have today.
And I think the biggest challenge is just having industry see that it's a long-term play, right? They're not going to see, a 6-month return, but they're going to see it in 5 or 6 years. And so as long as they can have that understanding, the benefits are just so amazingly, the possibilities are really great for business to come to the table.
I just want to, I guess I'm going to pose this to all of you. What ignited your passion to get involved with this specifically?
I'll jump in there first. I'm like, as you know, I'm not shy. I'm not camera shy, and I'm not mic shy. Get me on a stage, I'll be on any stage. One of the things that really ignited my passion is when I came across Carol Carter, and we had our first meeting, Alex, and she started sharing her experience and her vision of GlobalMindED. I said, wow, I wish this would have existed. And it took me back to a day. I remember going back to Laredo, Texas, which is where I'm from. I'd moved more than 10 times by the time I was 10 years old, all over southern Texas, to Denver an additional 2 times. And then I said I quit at that point. But going back when I was in my late 20s and seeing everybody that still was in the same place, I thought it was a little bit of a shock, even more of a shock, going in my late 30s. Everybody was still in the same community, living very, very identical lives than what they were years prior, decades prior. When you're talking about, I left when I was 7 years old. Here I go back 35 years plus later, and they're still in the same place. And to know that there are organizations today, I consider myself one of the lucky ones. I was willing to pay the price and never take no for an answer and find my way as I let it. But to find an organization that is wholeheartedly committed to the betterment of society. I support people that support my mission in the world, and that's to help make this world a better place. I can sit here and talk all day. I won't steal the thunder from you two.
I think you can speak for us.
I can speak for you.
Well, I guess for me, it was just as you get older and your life starts to evolve, you start thinking about other ways you have an impact. And as my wife and I have talked about starting our family, suddenly you realize that you want to do more. And so I thought, okay, I have some interest in education. I think I can have an impact there. And it was just kind of serendipitous. I was at an event and I saw my childhood soccer coach standing next to Carol Carter. And so I ended up talking with him. And,
can you imagine?
And he's kind of like, hey, you know, what you're doing, that's not, you should talk to Carol. And so I kind of started talking to Carol. And as I heard about GlobalMindED, I said, well, this is just awesome. I mean, here, I got to get involved and do what I can. And so that's kind of how I got into the organization.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, we're all going to mention Carol. She is an incredible woman who this was her vision, and she is growing it, and she's growing it in a way that it's not about her. So I happen to be next door neighbors with Carol. So she started talking to me about what this was and what her mission was, and she started just mentioning to me, you know, this is a great public policy conversation. This ties to the work you do. This ties to your passion. And so I went to the conference the first time and saw it, and I just fell in love with the idea. And it ties to what I do as a profession.
For our listeners out there, longtime listeners, I should say, we've had Carol on the show several times, and every time that she has joined us on the show, you can hear the passion in her voice. You
absolutely.
Can see it in her eyes when she talks about the GlobalMindED conference and seeing this come together. And she is a firecracker, and she is getting it done.
She is dynamite.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's absolutely amazing, remarkable person to follow and to see and to connect and collaborate and support in any way possible, because it is changing the world. It is impacting, and it impacts us all. If we don't bring these solutions to the table, if we're not the ones creating the solutions, we will suffer the consequences. And I believe we already are to a certain degree when it comes to society and innovation. And you can name a million different things. Today, come together, be together, and let's move forward together.
That is wonderful. One more time, check out globalminded.org. And you can get your tickets. You can apply for a scholarship if you can't afford those tickets for the conference. And just check it out. There's also a donate button there, as we mentioned. And once you're done at globalminded.org, come to cobrt.com/radio-podcast for this show and more. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.